Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for having invited me to be today with you. And I hope that this exchange will contribute to the next step towards a more circular economy, as the steel sector is a vital sector of the industry that we work together with. I have not really prepared a typical presentation. I will be using my slides more as sort of background illustration, also to draw your attention more to the slides than to me. So I will have a speech and then just have some slides in the background. So to start with, I wanted to show you this artistic creation of my team, done through a usage of a web tool. And this leaf represents the legal text of our Commission communication on circular economy, entitled Closing the Loop, a new action plan for the circular economy that was adopted in 2015. Now, by using this web tool, you insert the text, the legal text published in 2015, and then this is what you get. The words in the text, then depending on how frequently they appear in the text, appear bigger or smaller in that representation. So this is a sort of an unconventional and artistic way to illustrate what the Circular Economy Action Plan is about and what the main priorities are. If you look at it, the most repeated words in the legal text are, of course, circular, materials, recycling, then followed by waste, products, and plastics. And this is clearly linked to our approach. These were the priorities in 2015 communication, and we are still working on the implementation of this approach. But it also shows that what we were trying to do was to close the loop covering the whole life cycle of products, while also at the same time focusing on some strategic key sectors. And I would also like to draw your attention to how often the word states or member states appears in the communication. If you look at the top right corner of that picture, you will see words such as implementation, practices, management, cooperation. And this shows that the Commission's approach to building circular economy was to look at it as a joint endeavor, not something that is imposed from the top down, but more something that is built together with the national authorities and with the business stakeholders. So what we are trying to do is to create the right conditions for the change to happen at the ground level. Now, the next slide is, of course, much less attractive because it was prepared by the Commission services, and it's a graphic that represents the main elements of the strategy. I'm not going to go into detail because it's already a few years old, and you probably know it very well. So this strategy covers 4 key areas of action, starting from the production, then going to consumption, to waste management, and finally moving waste back into the economic cycle, so making it a resource again. And we addressed 5 priority sectors, including plastics, food waste, critical raw materials, construction and demolition, and biomass and bio-based products. Now, what was also important for us was to address 3 issues that would allow building circular economy, such as innovation, investments, and indicators that we could use to measure progress towards circularity, which builds very nicely into the presentation of Mr. Potocznik, which you have just heard. And indeed, under the leadership of our previous commissioner, we have laid down the foundations for this action plan. And I'm not surprising anyone by saying that the transition towards a more circular economic model has found a very strong support among policymakers and stakeholders in Europe. So this is not really something that we have to promote a lot, or we have to struggle to find support around the member states and stakeholders. We are asked to do more and be active in this area because everyone believes in it. We have witnessed support all over Europe. We see now countries such as Portugal, Spain, Greece and Italy that are really actively improving their waste management systems and taking holistic approaches to waste management, but also to circularity in other areas such as water or tourism sectors. We see these countries encouraging industrial symbiosis, and we see much more green public procurement happening around. We see the boost to the repair sectors. Frontrunners such as the Netherlands, France or Germany are teaming up with Slovenia, Slovakia, Latvia to find new ways of ensuring more sustainable production consumption patterns together. So there's a lot of cooperation across borders as well. And of course, companies have long realized that resource efficiency not only contributes to cutting off dependencies on, from volatile raw material prices, but also generates net benefits in terms of development of innovative business models, but also bringing on board consumers who are increasingly conscious of what is going on in the environment and are asking for more sustainable products and more sustainable services. So this is a well-selling agenda. More and more companies and more public authorities are incorporating circularity to their strategies, to their business models, and to their ways of doing things. And circularity is also becoming a sort of an indicator that counts when making structural changes, but also that counts for the financial sector when lending money to private businesses, which we're looking closely at as well. An integrated approach for a low carbon but also circular economy is, in our view, the only option for the European Union to contribute to climate change goals, to reduce pressure on natural resources, but also to fulfill the 2030 United Nations agenda. Now, this is particularly relevant for the steel sector. With an output of more than 160 million tons of steel per year, the EU is the second largest producer of steel in the world and plays a fundamental role in key European industrial sectors, such as transport, automotive, construction, but also in more recent applications in energy, in robotics, in advanced machinery, in defense, and in everyday household products. So steel is pretty much everywhere. It's vital to the European economy. And it has been recognized in the Commission's communication, A Renewed European Industrial Policy last year. Now, in terms of turning waste back into resources, this sector may appear much more circular than, for example, the plastics sector. We saw the recycling figures for plastics are rather low, and plastics are often linked to a lot of environmental problems. But we have to remember that steel production is energy intensive and is responsible for a third of European industrial CO2 emissions. So since the origins of the European construction, steel is an emblematic industrial sector in the EU, with strong synergies with transport, buildings, energy and defense. And if steel can get the reductions of CO2 emissions in line with the Paris Agreement, if steel manufacturing can become circular, then all other sectors can also do it. The 2015 adoption and the subsequent implementation of the Circular Economy Action Plan of the Commission was built up upon these cross-sectoral features. We wanted to make this communication a genuine cross-sectoral effort in the Commission, inside our institution. So we wanted to bring on board all the different Commission departments. Previously, the Commission was often accused of working on the so-called silos, so there was a bit of a rivalry or competition between different directorates general. Now, this was not the case with this communication. It was a new approach to policy and lawmaking, but also I think the circular economy agenda is an agenda that brings different departments together quite easily. So we cooperated with those services responsible for industry, for competitiveness, for consumers, for health, for research and innovation, trade, and so on. And I think the second important feature of this action plan is that since 2015, it allowed to mainstream a much wider concept of circular economy, which traditionally had been focused on resource management, or even waste management rather than resource management, into pretty much all relevant Commission policies. So if you look into the future and what will happen under the next Commission, it will be very difficult not to talk about circular economy, because it is now present not only in the environmental policy, it is at the core of the work of Directorate General that deals with growth. It is at the core of our industrial policy. We enshrined it in the future research and innovation needs. It is present in structural and cohesion funds. Even the European foreign and development policies are talking about circular economy. And it is not anymore reduced to closing the resource loops through recycling. We are looking at it in a broader, from a broader perspective. It's increasingly understood as slowing down the resource loops so that we prevent and design, prevent waste and design products in such a way that we don't let products become waste too soon. But we also try to look at narrowing down the resource flows to avoid inefficiencies in agriculture, in construction, etc. Since the adoption of this action plan in 2015, we were trying to tackle the transition to circular economy considering different approaches. So the action plan itself is a mix of soft regulatory measures, such as voluntary schemes. It contemplates standards to ensure the level playing field, but it was also accompanied by legal proposals that bind member states in terms of directives, and then through that, the stakeholders. Since 2015, we have adopted around 85% of the actions that were included in the annex to this action plan. There were 54 actions, and most likely you have already seen this table somewhere else in one of the presentations, but I like to show it because it offers a quite a clear overview on where we stand in the implementation of the Circular Economy Action Plan. And let me focus on some of these actions. Just mention briefly the waste legislation, the waste review that we have started in 2015 and that we have just concluded in May this year. This review, actually we started it before 2015 because that was already proposed by Commissioner Potocznik and withdrawn and then re-proposed with, I would say, cosmetic changes. Finally, when the review was adopted, the recycling targets for municipal waste were increased. So now we have a target of 65% of recycling by 2035. We increased the targets for packaging waste recycling, including for steel packaging and other material streams. And we have set a maximum allowed target for landfilling at 10% by 2035. The calculation rules for these targets, the separate collection obligations have been strengthened. We established minimum requirements for extended producer responsibility schemes. We have made extended producer responsibility mandatory for all packaging by 2025. And importantly, we also looked at the ways to strengthen the top part of the so-called waste hierarchy, so prevention. Prevention objectives are reinforced and will require member states to take specific measures to tackle food waste and marine litter, also as a contribution to the European commitments under the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So this new legislation on waste, we hope, gives certainty for investors and companies in the waste and secondary raw material sectors, but it also brings a forward-looking agenda, which is probably not that relevant for you as members of the steel industry, but it's relevant for you as a citizen. So I will just briefly mention that we have to consider new targets for food waste by 2023, separate collection for textiles by 2025, and we will have a new review of some of the waste legislation, namely batteries and end-of-life vehicles directives, coming up in 2 to 3 years. So we have ahead of us a number of opportunities to continue with this systematic transformation of our economy. And we need to make sure to take full advantage of all the possibilities that are laid down by this legislation. Implementation is always key, and it always is problematic. If the legislation was properly implemented, I don't think we would have such big problems, but it's always a big challenge. In January this year, we have unveiled a new package of deliverables, which triggered a lot of discussions in the media because it tackles everyday items made of plastics. So probably you have heard about our new proposal on single-use plastic items and fishing gear linked to curbing the marine litter issue. And also this strategy on plastics that encompasses more actions on plastic items. But this package included other very important elements as well. The monitoring framework of indicators to measure circular economy was one of them. We issued a communication on the interface between chemicals, products, and waste legislation, which is crucial for industries that struggle to use the waste derived materials because of contamination that is unknown to them. And we have published a report on critical raw materials. We will need to work more on these aspects, and I hope that this will happen under the new Commission. The broad discussion triggered by the communication on the interface between chemicals, products, and waste legislation will give some clarity on whether the barriers that we identified are really the right ones, whether indeed the options that we propose are appropriate, and what other tools can be mobilized, but it doesn't yet give the answers to the questions posed. So this will have to continue to be at the core of the discussions about circular economy. And we are really at the crossroads with eco-design and our product policies, because this is one of the main deliverables that have not been presented yet. We have already committed in the eco-design working plan covering years 2016 to 19 that we will systematically consider circular economy aspects such as durability of products, their repairability and recyclability when revising the existing and when proposing new implementing measures on eco-design. However, there is a big remaining question that needs to be addressed, namely how do we extend the benefits of this very successful legislation from energy-related products to products that are not energy-related. We need to do that, and how to do that in practice. So that's another big issue to address. I would very briefly like to mention two other elements, voluntary approaches that we are also talking about in this action plan. First of all, our work on environmental footprint methods for products and services. We want to come up with ready environmental footprint methods in the coming months, and that will allow assessing the environmental performance of products and services in a very robust and scientifically sound manner, and avoid so-called greenwashing. So we hope that this will be interesting for those who make green claims, and that we will be able to eliminate false green claims, which are very present on the market and affect competition. And we are also counting on a positive impact from green public procurement work to enlarge the market from green products, to encourage more uptake, and this is supported by our work on training for public procurers and providing guidance to them on how to do it. I don't know if you follow on Twitter the two commissioners that are very actively involved in circular economy. I just wanted to show you these two quotes from the recent tweets. And that brings me to a sort of a look into the future, like what are we going to do next? With the implementation of the current action plan coming to an end, and also with the current College of Commissioners finishing their mandates, there's no better moment to reflect on what other aspects we need to tackle to continue with the transition towards circular economy. Work carried out at national and regional level already advances some of the sectors that could benefit the most from the next steps in the transition. We see such work, for instance, in the area of textiles in the Netherlands, or in the Belgian region of Flanders on carbon footprint. Also, in the European Union's next multi-annual financial framework, we reflect the commitment that the EU has made to decarbonize its economy in line with the Paris Agreement targets. Now, it seems to me that achieving a low-carbon economy, I think this is what I would comment also to the slide of Mr. Potocnik. Low-carbon economy, clearly that will be one of the priorities for the next 5 years. But can the European economy be low-carbon without first being circular? Now, I'm not sure that can happen. Well, they should probably go in parallel, but what would be the trade-offs between those two transitions? We have tools and instruments such as eco-design at hand, and the timing is right, but is the sector-by-sector approach the right one? Is it the best option, or should the contribution of the circular economy to climate change be explored in a more horizontal manner and not by sectors? So it is clear that sectoral approach worked so far, for instance, in the case of plastics, but would it work for textiles or for construction? And then what else can be done in those sectors where we already acted to move them further towards circularity? And importantly, I think this question of moving from abiotic to biotic cycles is going to be a very important one to address in the near future. So is sustainable and circular bioeconomy the next logical theme to develop further? And how to protect our natural capital and ecosystem services? Is circular economy approach right also for them? Coming back to the European financial framework, circular economy has been identified as a priority, for example, in the cohesion policy, but what projects should be supported to have the biggest impact? And how can this help to ensure an inclusive transition, not only transition for some, but a transition for everyone? Now we are having a very intense discussion within the Commission on the next funding priorities in the areas of research and innovation. So we're talking about how to spend all these 96 billion euro on research and innovation. And clearly circular economy is at the heart of this discussion. But exactly which areas of research and innovation should we target? I think that would be a very interesting question to also ask here and have some feedback from your sector. We are presently talking about all these aspects in the Commission, and we hope that we will have some reflections, some questions ready for the next college to take up. And I hope to hear some interesting ideas also in this conference, so that I can use them in my work in the coming months while we prepare for the new college. And just let me very briefly use this occasion to present a slide about our recently launched European Circular Economy Stakeholder platform. This is what we called a virtual open space, and the aim of this platform is to promote Europe's transition to circular economy by facilitating dialogue between stakeholders and by disseminating activities, best practices, strategies that the stakeholders adopted. Some have already been published there. Some stakeholders made their best practice stories available for replication, and I would encourage you to do the same and become a recognized actor in the transition to circular economy in this platform as well. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to hearing more about your experiences today. And let me very quickly introduce the next speaker, Axel Egert, who is the Director General of Eurofair, and whom I also recall from my previous jobs in the Commission on Waste. Eurofair has been very active in contacts with the Commission for many years. And Axel, who's Director General since 2014, worked previously in the association as Director of Public Affairs and Communication. He's German, holds degrees in modern history, economics and law, and have very extensive experience in dealing with European institutions, having worked in the European Parliament for 8 years. So, Mr. Egert, the floor is yours, and thank you very much for your attention.